You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Here we are in the beginning of 2023. It's a perfect time to talk about what do we see as some of the top transportation issues in this year? How will it affect the auto market? How will it affect the fuels market? And how will it affect fuels at the retail level? Today joining us is regular host and guest, John Eichberger, the Executive Director of the Fuels Institute, and he's going to answer all these questions looking at what is going to happen this year. And what we're going to avoid is we're going to avoid the gotchas. We couldn't have predicted the Ukraine invasion by Russia last year. We couldn't have predicted $5 gas. We couldn't have predicted a lot of things that went on, when a hurricane's going to hit, where it's going to hit, all that stuff. So set that aside. What we're going to look at is some of the trends that are going to be part of 2023, regardless of the things that we can anticipate. So first off, welcome, John. Glad you could join us again.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be back. You say we're not going to predict. There's a lot of people out there making predictions. Bold predictions. It is going to be this by 2030. Half the vehicles sold will be electric by 2030 with no caveats whatsoever. So you're right. We're not going to do that. We're going to be very cognizant of the fact that, as Yoda says, very always in motion the future is. And that's something that people need to keep in mind is there's no guarantees. There's so many variables affecting the fuels and vehicles market that anybody who tells you they know what the future is going to be is selling you something you don't want to buy.
Well said. So what's going to be the gas price at the end of next year?
I guarantee you it's going to have a decimal point in it. And probably a 9/10 at the end.
It's going to be 0.9, except in Canada, it might be 0.2 or 0.4 or 0.8 or something like that, because it's liters, but that's a whole different show. So anyway, when we talk about some of the broad issues, let's start with vehicles, and then we'll dive into fuels after that, and then we'll look at some external factors. But starting with vehicles, there's 280 million vehicles on the road in the United States. New vehicle sales are roughly 14 million in the last 2 years. So roughly 5% of all vehicles on the road are new vehicles in a given year. And then you factor in, what do we have? About 40 million used car sales in a given year. So let's go through the landscape of vehicles. What are some of the big things looking at vehicles and vehicles entering the market, or vehicles just being moved around in the market?
I think one of the key things that we need to parse away here is the news is constantly about electric vehicles. And electric vehicles have grown significantly. They're about 5.25% of sales through the end of November this year. They're about 3% of sales last year. So huge increase in sales. There's still about 0.5% of vehicles on the road. But, I was talking to a reporter from Bloomberg a while back, and they were asking, we see vehicle miles traveled have gone up, yet gasoline demand's gone down. How is that possible? Well, about 10 years ago, when the Obama CAFE fuel efficiency requirements were in place, the automaker started making plans for more efficient vehicles to comply with the federal regs. Well, that's been about 10 years. Vehicles are on the road about 12 years. The vast majority of vehicles on the road have been sold in the last 10 to 15 years. And so you have a significant increase in efficiency overall. And I don't think we're going to see that change. We're going to continue to see vehicles get more efficient, whether they be liquid fuel, plug-in, or whatever. We're going to continue to see that. And for the fuel retailer, that means that what we've been predicting, you and I, for the last 10, 15 years is demand destruction year over year. We're starting to see that now. Because the vehicles are so much more efficient than the ones they're replacing, we're starting to see consistent reduction in per capita demand, per mile demand. And I don't see that slowing down anytime soon.
And people tend to focus on EVs and everything that's going on related to EVs and the growth of, and as you said, 5% of the new car sales, and new car sales are 5% of all sales. So that's where you get the math where it's a fraction of a percent. But hybrids, I think, are also a kind of a forgotten story in this whole discussion about fuel efficiency.
Yeah, back in 2018, I did analysis. I think the highest percentage we ever got of hybrids was about 3%. And I remember back in like 2004, 2005, there were reports there's going to be 150 models of hybrids on the market in the next couple of years. They're going to dominate. Everybody's going to be hybrid. And then this kind of fell off, right? Well, what happened was with the CAFE program and efficiency requirements, we started seeing a renewed emphasis on hybrids in the last 5-10 years. Last year, hybrids hit 5.33% of all sales. This year, they're almost 6% of all sales. And so you're seeing vehicles that are getting significantly more efficient with a hybrid technology. The prices have come down. They're more cost competitive. Some models are no longer available in non-hybrid model, and sales have not suffered. When consumers don't have to make a conscious decision on a new technology and they're just buying a vehicle that's more efficient and the same cost, it's pretty easy to make the decision. When you're trying to convince them, hey, this new technology is really cool, people are kind of nervous about new, especially when it comes to the second largest purchase they'll make in their life. And so we're seeing a huge resurgence in hybrid. And I think we're going to continue to see that going forward.
Second largest purchase, first largest purchase being Bitcoin, I assume?
Yeah, apparently some automaker stocks these days. Yeah.
Or homes, yes. So it's the new year, but it's not the new year in terms of car sales. Car sales but the new model year started a couple months ago. Are there things that you've seen take off or we might want to look at that's already happened with the 2023 models?
I think the key is we've seen a surge in the number of electric vehicle models available. The sales are strong. They're going to continue to be strong. We will see a change in sales growth next year because almost every automaker increased the price of their electric vehicles this year by up to $10,000, some of them. Some stopped producing their lower trim, most affordable EV because they couldn't afford to do so. That was supply chain, a whole bunch of issues, inflation. And then you have the Inflation Reduction Act, which changed the tax credit for electric vehicles that put in place a requirement that a certain percentage be made in America. The analyses I've seen show that maybe 3, maybe 5 individual models will qualify for the full tax credit. I've seen some reports say 0 models in the U.S. will qualify for the full tax credit. So affordability of EVs has gone the wrong direction, and it's going to take a couple years for that to reverse. It means that sales are going to slow down. That being said, the number of models, I think a couple years ago, you and I went to an auto show, and we were counting on one hand the number of vehicles to plug. And then we're up to like 15, 19. We are in significant volume of options. And what we've seen is consumers now have the choice to buy a sedan, a pickup truck, a sport utility vehicle, a crossover utility vehicle, whatever kind of vehicle they want, there's an electric vehicle in that model or in that type of vehicle. Is it affordable? Maybe not. But I think we're starting to see recognition that EVs are going to gain more attention and more interest. Going into next year, I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of revolutionary changes. It really depends what happens with the economy. You mentioned 14 million vehicles likely to be sold this year, and that's what we're looking at. 15 million last year. Before pandemic, we were in the 17 to 17.5 million vehicles a year. And so we've seen a change in the volume being sold. We'll see what happens with supply chain. We'll see what happens with the economy as a whole. But I wouldn't expect anything in 23 to be really revolutionary other than possibly some more splash and flash for the news cycle. But in terms of fundamental changes to the market, I'm not anticipating much.
So one other thing, just looking at the vehicles market, is roughly, and I think when we look at EVs, they tend to be sedans. And yet, when you look at new cars, sedans are about 30% of new car sales, and then 70% is SUVs, light-duty trucks, whatever you want to call them, but it's not sedans. So how do we get to the point where EV sales are ramping up beyond that 30% of the market that's sedans?
Well, I think we're at a point where it's not necessarily sedans anymore. So if you look at Tesla is the number one vehicle manufacturer of EVs in the U.S. So I think, let me take a look at the numbers here, 62% of sales through November this year were Tesla brand. But their number one selling vehicle is the Model Y, which is a crossover. And then the Model 3, which is a sedan. So we're starting to see that demographics of the EV market change. And that's why you're starting to see growth. You're starting to see the vehicles being offered the way the customers want them. Early on, it was all about affordability, range, efficiency, keep the cost down. Now it's about, okay, give the customer what they want, but give them a plug-in powertrain if they want it. And so I think that's why we're seeing so much excitement. I think NACS did a survey earlier this year that said Americans think 20% of vehicles on the road are electric. When you and I chatted a few months ago, less than 1%, maybe half of 1% are electric. So there's a perception reality here. But because the automakers are making such a blitzkrieg in terms of the marketing of new vehicles, it's changing the dynamics. Every headline is talking about EVs. From a fuel retailer perspective, there's a lot of concern about EVs. They're not really having much of an impact on the market. Maybe in some markets of California where concentration is pretty heavy, but in terms of the national average, it's still pretty minimal impact. We did a study at the Fuels Institute earlier this year that showed 83% of all electric vehicles are registered in just 15 states, with 44% of them in California. It's very easy to get caught up in national trends and headlines, but it really comes down to what's happening in your own market and how's that affecting your business. I think the key for the fuel retailer is it's not so much EVs, it's efficiency. EVs are part of that, but it's really about the new vehicles coming on market that are getting more miles per gallon that's changing the dynamics of how you have to go to business.
So you mentioned the Fuels Institute, you mentioned research. First off, next month, the Fuels Institute celebrates its 10th anniversary. Congratulations. In that time, you've come out with quite a few research reports, and those are all online, related to fuels, related to vehicles. And before we get into the discussion of fuels, are there any vehicles ones that are coming out in the next few months that you want to highlight, or any that have come out in the past few months?
So we've got two kind of tranches of stuff we're doing. Our focus right now is, the federal government, the global governmental leaders, the financial services industry have all said we need to decarbonize transportation. We don't get into whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing, but if that's the goal, we're trying to focus on how do we do it effectively, efficiently, and sustainably. So we've got research looking at EV infrastructure for charging, because if you're going to sell EVs and no chargers, it's kind of a problem. If you're going to build chargers and there's no EVs, kind of a problem. So we're trying to figure out that balance. We're trying to accelerate a business case so that those who want to install chargers can make money doing so. And there's an economic incentive to do it without a government handout. And then we're doing a series of research projects and analyses looking at, okay, what about the rest of the vehicles? You mentioned there's 280 million registered vehicles in the United States. There's 1.4 billion in the world. They're pretty much all liquid fuel. If we really want to talk about decarbonizing, we have to talk about that. Of the 14 million vehicles we're going to sell this year, 86% are internal combustion engine liquid fuel. Still, that's 8, 9 million, 10 million vehicles, right? So we're going to continue adding internal combustion engines to market, no matter what different markets try to do in terms of banning combustion engine sales. They're not going away anytime soon. And so we've got research looking at how do you effectively decarbonize the liquid fuel space. We published a paper in January of 2022, which showed that 73% of the emissions from an internal combustion engine come from the fuel cycle. So if you want to have an impact on emissions from combustion engine vehicles, it starts with the fuel. Mm-hmm. And so we're doing a lot of research to see how do we lower the carbon intensity of the fuel we're providing legacy vehicles and new to market vehicles. How do we open up the conversation from decarbonization equals electrification? Because that's not true. Electrification is part of decarbonizing. What we really are trying to do is open up the conversation to allow innovation to really take the lead. Because if you would believe we're facing a climate crisis and you think electric vehicles are the answer to save the world, you've already lost. Because it's going to take decades to turn over the 1.4 billion vehicles in the world.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have innovative solutions now. And so we're doing a lot of research to try to uncover those opportunities and broaden the conversation with our leaders to allow innovation, engineering wonders, scientists to determine where we go from here.
So let's spend a couple minutes, since you had mentioned fuels, let's spend a couple minutes on fuels. And I know diesel has been a big conversation in 2022. Concerns about availability, concerns about how that plays out with what's happened in Ukraine with Russia, and how that affects Europe and how fuel is moved from country to country based on refineries, all that other stuff. And diesel is important for our economy because I'm sure some of you are guilty of this over the holidays. You had to have that overnight delivery of some $2 cat toy to arrive in that stocking. Now that requires some diesel fuel to deliver that, most likely. So what is going on in the diesel market that we might want to pay attention to in 2023?
It's funny. In middle of December, we published a new policy considerations paper focused on the medium heavy duty space. And we said, if you're going to reduce emissions from commercial vehicles, you got to really pay attention to that market. It's very diverse, tons of different types of vehicles, different use case applications, more challenging to reduce carbon emissions, but also more opportunities to be innovative with solutions. The diesel market is still about 99% of the commercial vehicle space. Get down to lighter duty vehicles, you get some more gasoline, you get some electric vans. But really, it is the heartbeat of the economy. And it's going to continue to be the heartbeat of the economy for a long time. Now, on the bright side, a modern diesel engine running on a low carbon diesel fuel, which could be renewable diesel, a biodiesel blend, or whatever, can be near zero carbon. And that's important, that we can get to near zero carbon now without having to change the vehicles. So that's something we need to be paying attention to. In the diesel market itself, the increase in price this year, multiple factors. One, the Ukraine war put a lot of pressure on global supplies. There was a lot of concern that Europe would turn to distillates for heating needs this summer because of the disruption in supply of natural gas from Russia. So that pulled a lot of distillates in the global market to Europe for stockpiling purposes. That seems to have dissipated a little bit here towards the end of the year. But the other thing that we continue to forget about, 3 years ago, there was this big monolithic change in the global distillate market. The International Maritime Organization required a dramatic reduction, the sulfur content of marine-going fuel, bunker fuel. There was some forecast saying that was going to be a multi-trillion-dollar impact on the economy. It was a little extreme. There's a few guys out there who like to make really outrageous claims, and if they're right, then they're golden child, right?
It's their description on LinkedIn. Write about something 3 years ago.
Right, exactly. So there was a lot of gloom and doom. Oh my goodness, fire and brimstone, the world's going to fall apart. It wasn't true. But what happened was that started in 2000. What else was going on in 2000? Oh, that's right.
EPA.
We shut down the entire world for COVID, right? And so
in 2020.
2020, yeah. What did I say? 2012?
2000.
Okay, 2020. Shut down the entire world for COVID. So we imposed this new fuel requirement on the maritime market that was going to pull diesel fuel into the ocean-going vessels to match their requirements. But demand cratered, so we didn't notice it. We didn't pay any attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I look back at a paper we published in 2019, which aggregated forecasts, and we came out saying, okay, the baseline seems to be consensus that the IMO reg will increase fuel prices 25 to 75 cents for 2 to 3 years. Well, fast forward to today, talk to markets, experts go, yeah, IMO regulations is pulling low sulfur diesel fuel from the on-road market to the marine market. So you have that distinction going on. There's some competition there. Then you have a situation where you had the COVID shutdown. It decimated demand. Well, a lot of people got strung out to dry on supply. Oil prices tanked, fuel prices tanked. And then, lo and behold, demand came back really, really fast. At the same time, the governments are telling the petroleum industry, we don't like your product. We want to ban it. The investors are going, whoa, don't go out and invest in a whole lot of new production because that's not sustainable for your investors and shareholders. You need to be more responsible with your money. And so you have this massive global supply-demand imbalance that was prompted by COVID, complicated by IMO regulations, just a whole, we started this off saying you can't predict the future because there's too many variables. There are so many variables affecting the diesel market. To try to predict where things are is very difficult. PAD 1, East Coast, was the most dramatically hit with diesel supply challenges this year. Why? We had several refineries disappear. One in Philadelphia caught fire, is not coming back, or had an explosion, is not coming back. That was like 400,000 barrels per day of capacity. You lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 800,000 barrels of capacity, refining capacity, on the East Coast in the last couple of years. That's not coming back. How are you resupplying that?
That's one tenth of demand for transportation fuel. So that's a big hit.
Right. And so you got that. You got the demand from Europe. All these things, it's difficult. It's a challenging market. The bright side is most experts think that the price spikes we saw in diesel fuel this fall were temporary, and it seems to be supplies coming back online. It's just everything comes together at once. And anybody try to say, this is the reason, they're full of it. There's too many reasons to isolate and say one factor is the reason.
So let's just wrap up and talk about the Fuels Institute and NACS. We're nonpartisan. We aren't taking a political side here, but we're going to talk about politics and how politics can play a role in fuels. I think over the last 20 years, John, with your work initially at NACS and now with the Fuels Institute and we kind of changed the narrative and others in the industry where when prices went up, they would blame the retailer. Now people don't blame the retailer. They've now weaponized it as a political thing. So it's either the one side's fault or the other side's fault. So it always has to be something. But anyway, when we look at some of the issues with politics, how might that play out in the transportation market over this year and maybe beyond, whether that's some of the issues related to zero emissions in 2035. That seems to be gaining traction in a number of states. We have things like Governor DeSantis looking at withdrawing billions of dollars from BlackRock related to its work with ESG. Are there things that we need to be looking at to see how they may affect the market?
It's funny. Politicians have such an inflated sense of their impact. And so as we enter the 2024 presidential election, I can't believe I'm saying that already.
Yeah, it started.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be, what were prices like before President Biden was elected? What are fuel prices like now? And it's hokum. It's BS. It's not, the president does not control gas prices. You guys have a paper on that on convenience.org that articulates that. Politicians and politics do have an impact, though, based on the policies they set. So coming out of COVID, I mentioned this earlier, we needed more supply. Demand recovered so fast, but supply was constrained because the petroleum industry lost their shirts when the economy shut down. At the same time, we had just elected a new presidential administration who wanted to be the climate president and was telling the petroleum industry, we don't want your product. But then when prices spiked, hey, we need more of your product. Why aren't you producing? And so you're having these signals sent to the petroleum industry that you're persona non grata. Oh, but please save us. It's kind of difficult, right? I think there is a focus on part of some in government that we have to reduce carbon emissions at all costs. And if you're concerned about a climate crisis, I understand that mindset. But once you say at all costs, you are basically abdicating responsibility, because we have to control emissions, whatever your motivation is, but we have to take care of people too. And I think where President Biden found himself between a rock and a hard place last year was he wants to protect the environment, enact policies that reduce emissions, but he's always been the benefactor of the less advantaged, the disadvantaged, the lower income. He's always been a politician who wants to protect those less fortunate. And you got to give him great credit for that history. But now he found himself in a situation where he had $6 gasoline in California. Mm-hmm. And so he's begging the petroleum industry to increase production. At the same time, he's trying to reduce use of petroleum to address climate. So I think we're entering a period of reckoning. I think Europe has already hit it, where they're looking at their policies that were designed to rapidly move away from fossil fuel energy to, whoa, we want to do that, but we got to do it responsibly and carefully to protect our people. We need to move in that direction. We can reduce emissions. We can reduce carbon emissions. We can decarbonize in a way that doesn't hurt people. But we have to elevate the needs of people above the rhetoric. Will we get to that point? I don't know. And I was in politics for 20 years. It's gotten so much worse. You've got a House going to be run by the narrowest majority by the Republicans. Senate's still going to be Democrat. White House is going to be Democrat. Going into a presidential election, it's going to be rancorous. It's going to be a lot of oversight hearings, a lot of name calling, a lot of attack ads. On the bright side, I think it slows everything down. And I think we're going a little too fast before. So we need to slow down. We need to think more carefully. We need to be more creative in our solutions. We need to get out of this mindset that we know the answer, and this is the answer. We're going to push this answer no matter what. Square peg, round hole, doesn't matter. Get the mallet, bang it through. We got to stop that mentality and be a little more open to innovation, I said before. So my hope is that the stalemate in Washington will give us the opportunity. I think a slowdown in the growth of EV sales is going to wake some people up that maybe we need multiple solutions. And I think that opens up a great opportunity to have a wonderful discussion about how we can lower the carbon intensity of our liquid fuel supply, benefit the environment, benefit consumers, and make sure the economy stays healthy. And I think that's the direction we need to be heading.
So let's end on that, the idea of discussion and dialogue. And from the retail perspective, it's telling our story about where we fit in and what are the costs and all those factors. From the Fuels Institute side, it's continuing to give bipartisan research that is unbiased. Unpartisan. And where do they find that as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Fuels Institute?
Go to fuelsinstitute.org. We have a brand new website we just launched a couple weeks ago. Everything you need to know about us is there. If you have any questions, reach out to me directly. Happy to chat with anybody who wants to get involved, learn more.
So I guess, can we end with our prediction that 2023, it won't be boring yet again for the 100 and something year about since oil and gas has been around?
It is definitely not going to be boring. That we can guarantee.
Well, thanks for joining us today, John. And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.